Okay, so to this particular type of style, there's not very much to this one. There will be some explanations as to what UV mapping is and coordinates. But other than that, this should be a fairly easygoing patch-ish. There are some few things in here and there that are a little bit different. Like we have the map node, which we haven't talked about. And then most of the rest of this is pretty much very similar to what we've already talked about. So we're going to go through some of this. So in every wire patch, there's typically going to be a texture out. And in most cases, there'll be a textured in. The only time that won't happen is when you're doing a effect, or excuse me, when you're doing a source. When you're doing a source, typically, depending on how the patch is set up, you wouldn't have a textured in, you would only have a texture out. But in this particular case, because this is an effect, we're doing this on something that's been entered into the system, and then we're making those effect changes, and then texturing it out to the system to Resolume, Arena, or Wire. Um, and then basically the rest of this is just setup. So I have the hub. The hub is just basically like a placeholder for texture in. And the reason why you typically do this is because then you'll have areas where, for instance, I may want like a whole bunch of connections, right? But they're further on down the line. So then what I would do is I would move my hub where I need it and then make the links or the connections to that specific area. So that's the reason for the hub. The hub is just basically a pass through for whatever you decide to have it for. So it doesn't have to be on a textured in. It can be on any kind of node system. So if, for instance, we have this float in that's just called red, I could pass it into this, and then I could move this anywhere within the node system. So this is a quick way of moving through the system, and then having a way to kind of keep tabs as to where you are. So that's the reason for the hub. This is a Boolean in. Boolean in is nothing more than an input. So if you go to your inputs, which should be here, you'll notice that there's a series of inputs. You have your int in, your float in, your color in, and your Boolean in. Boolean is your true or false values, yes or no values, input, output, IO. So you also have other options. You have various of different things, including the texture in is also here. You can find it there, or you can just type it in texture, which is what I usually typically do. I'll start typing in something and it'll come up. Usually that's quicker for me specifically. Uh, so that's basically to kind of give you an idea as to what we're doing here is we're setting a true or false value, color offset. We're telling it, do I want to do a color offset? And if I do, check this button. And then what will happen is it will set the bypass to the color offset so that you either if you want it or you don't want it. So if I turn it off, it will turn off the color bypass by basically or excuse me, color offset by turning the bypass value to on. And when it's on, that's when it will bypass the color offset. The 1-X is because I'm going to make a reverse um, true or false value. So I want this to be highlighted when I I want this to be highlighted when I've turned it on is the effect, right? So if I turn it off, I want it not to be affected, right? So the bypass is reversed. So that's what this is. This is just a reversed value. So right now it's set to 1, for instance. If I check the checkbox, now it's set to 0. Vice versa, if I didn't, this value would be, instead of true, it'd be false, which is 0. And so what would happen is I would get the reverse effect, basically, is what this does. And I apologize, it's the opposite. So true is a 1 value, and then the false is the 0 value. So just a heads up. All right, come on. Come on. Sorry. In any case, we have a series of float ins. we have the red, green, and blue values, and those are going into a float 2. The reason why they're going into a float 2, yes. She's a curious one. Um, so as we have here is we have a float 2, and the reason why is because there's two values. The offset is set to an x and y value, so you have your green, your red, your blue. I only want to affect the x, which is the left and right values, not the up and down values. So you don't see those values. It's a 0 value for each of the y values, so you can't move it up and down. You can only move it left to right. So that's the red, green, and blue, and the color offset, which is something we've already done. The color offset we actually used in a different patch. I think that was that last week's? I don't think it was last week's. I think it was the week before. That was when we were talking about that Perlin noise and the color offset for one of those. Then we also have here is a mask. Masks are very interesting. We've talked about this node as well and some of the things that we can do with this. And in this particular case, I'm using the mask to make transparent anything that's the value for this set down here. And we'll go through this in just one second, but basically what's happening here is I'm telling it to make this my mask value. So what I've done is I've made a gradient. Oh, actually, maybe we'll talk about it now. I've made a gradient. I've added a curve that's set to seen out. And the reason being is because I want the black value to be closer to the bottom, less in the middle. I don't want as much grayscale, so I want it to be in the last quarter of the space. And then what I did was I actually created a mirror. So then we have this gradient here, right? So you could also create this with, instead of mirror, I probably could have used, I could have used uh, an expand and then use the ping pong like we talked about before, and that would have achieved the same goal. But in this particular case, I just used a mirror. Not any real particular reason. Either way works. It's either is relevant. Um, and then transformed that space. I rotated it 0.1 so that it's, instead of straight vertical, it's got a little bit of a curve. And then I also added some levels to kind of push those values closer to the middle. The levels are set up brighter, so the brighter areas smush the darker areas together and cause a little bit less space there. What I would typically do in these particular cases is I would probably add in a float in here. And the reason why is because I want to control that dark value. So then what I would do is I would just basically connect these, all three of these, to a float in and then just set it to a middle value, and that would be the float in for the mask. So we'll just call this mask value, and I'll show you what this does basically. So here we have a like here we have this what am I trying to say? We have this like shape. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my bearings on this a little bit here. So we have this value, which is the original texture in, and I'm adding that into a join. Okay. Like we talked about before, the joins are reverse from a video mixer, but it's the same kind of principle. We're adding the two values, the two layers together. Okay. But the joins are like a cheaper version of the video mixer. There's so many things that you can do with the video mixer, but with the join, you're typically basically taking two shapes, or in this particular case, we're taking two layers and we're adding them together. And in that particular case, the output 0 is the bottommost layer, and the input 0 is the bottommost layer, and the input 1 is the topmost layer. So what we're doing here is we're actually adding a mask on top of the original layer. And the reason being is because I want to see the original layer overlaid. I want the fuzziness, the layer that causes, the mirrored look, to be overlaid on top of the original image. And it's not particular so interesting here, but if I change my wire logo, you'll notice that now we have these kind of like edges that are kind of transparent, and that's because we have this mask value. We can change this mask value. This is the mask value that we were adding in just a second ago, and you'll notice that this is taking those levels there, and it's adding this as the mask. So now when we go here, this is what we're seeing from the color offset from the mirror that we created. And we haven't gone through the mirror yet. I'll explain that in just one second. But basically, that's what we're creating here is we're creating a mask based on the original design, and it's over the top of what's already there. So then this just allows us to kind of control that. There may be cases where we want to see the original design in that space. And we're going to go through a little bit more because I don't like how this is set up. I want to give a better example. I'm going to do that in just one second because I want to explain the mirror process, uh, get to that particular part. So what we've done here is we've actually used a couple different techniques. What I've done here is I've created this transform. Okay. So what I've done here is I've created this transform out of a UV texture. UV textures are the X and Y values um, of your like a layer, right? So this UV texture is really like a stand-in, I guess you could say, for your space. So um, the best way I can explain this is a map, a UV map. That's the reason, that's what they usually typically call is a UV map, right? It's a UV texture of the camera space. So in this particular case, it's being used as this is the stage of whatever your input is. So this is a placement of your texture in, right? So your texture in, that's this space here is being correlated in this UV texture. And so what I can do is I can take that UV texture and I can repeat it multiple times. And this is a bad example. Let me see if I can get a better example. UV, we won't create a new UV texture, but I'll create a new repeat. Okay. And we'll set this repeat to like 6x6. Okay. And I'll make this UV texture, and of course it's the wrong repeat. I apologize. Repeat. So there's two different repeats. You'll notice here, one is at the very top, and then the second one is video effect. That's the one that we want. We don't want the shape one because that only applies to the shapes. So the all for all else, you're going to use the video output, the video what you call it, repeat, the video effect. Okay. So when you're using your video effect, I'm going to drag the video effect into the UV texture into the repeat, and I'm going to change my repeat to like 6x6. So now I have this effect where I've basically shrunk them all down and repeated it multiple times. So the reason why I would want to do this is because I want to repeat a specific texture multiple times. And I can do this by basically adding or by slicing up or repeating the UV texture and then have this stand in be replaced by the texture in. And so I'm doing that here. I'm using this. Actually, that's a bad example. Let me think about this. Can I do a quick UV texture? That's that, and it's the UV offset, the UV map, I believe, is the one that I'm looking for. So then in this one, this is a backwards kind of thing. There we go. Okay, so here's what I'm basically creating, right? When I'm doing a UV map. When I'm doing a UV map, I'm actually repeating multiple times the texture in that's been brought in. Does that make sense? Have I lost you guys about what it is that I'm doing here? Possibly not. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically creating a UV texture. I'm repeating that UV texture multiple times, and then I'm transforming it to basically create a scale of 400. So I'm taking the UV maps and I'm stretching them out. And the reason why I'm creating that stretching is because then what happens is this UV offset creates an offset of each of those. They're like individually lined up together. And I'm using a multiplier to create that offset. I've also added in a pixel blur, and the reason why is because I want to kind of shape those edges a little bit so that they're not so sharp. And that's the reason for the pixel blur. The pixel blur is just just a way to kind of modify those edges so that they're not so angular. And then what I've done is I've taken that UV offset that I've created and I put it into the color offset and then added it to the mask. And so that creates this effect. I'm basically using a UV map here. I'm repeating it tons of times here. You'll notice here my map, my remap of this float. So this goes from 0 to 1, but I'm changing the values from 0 to 200. So when I'm about 0 0.5, I'm actually doing about 100 different repeat columns. And so this is less. So if I shrink this down, you'll notice that at 0.0526, I'm getting about, I think it's about 12 UV maps lined up to edge to edge to edge to edge, right? And so then if I do a transform, which I'm stretching the image, and then once I stretched them, I pixel blur it just a little bit. I can add a little bit of Gaussian blur, and then that creates this shape. So as I scale this in, you'll notice that the shape starts to change. Now, there are a couple things that to kind of keep in mind with this. As I scroll this in, this value, you'll notice that now the shape has kind of, it looks a little funny. And the reason being is because most likely it's because my pixel blur is too high. So what I would have to do is I would need to set a value here at the blur. So what I would do is I would add in like a way to, I would expose this as an input, and then I would use this like fractal amount. I would want to add it to the fractal amount or just below the fractal amount. And the reason being is because when we're back over here, if I change this value, it's really, really sharp there. I can actually take the pixel blur and I can change that saw wave, if you will. So what I'm basically creating here is a way to kind of create that mirrored effect by basically offsetting each one based on the map or based on the UV texture that's been transformed multiple times and repeated. And that's basically how that's created. Now, like I said, there's certain things that I'm not crazy about here. One of the things that I'm not crazy about is in this setting, I created this little um, this mask to basically bleed the background in. But one of the things that I've been thinking is that I'm just creating just this generic mask. I might want to be able to create a way to kind of create like something from this shape. So let's do that. I want to create a mask that creates a fade around the edges, but in the middle you see the trying to figure out how to explain this. Let's just do it. Threshold, right? And then I'm going to plug the threshold into this. I'm going to max out my threshold. Well, actually, I'm going to probably create an auto mask first. And the reason why I'm going to do an auto mask is just because it's cheaper and it's faster. So we've set an auto mask, set the contrast up. I'm going to connect it here. The reason for the auto mask is just in case there's something that hasn't been masked out. This will just automatically mask it out for me. And then I have a threshold the threshold is set to a white value, right? Um, and then what I could do is I could take that value, I can bring it down here, and then this is my levels, right? Anywhere there's a dark value like that, this is going to be transparent. So I want to reverse this role. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a dark like this, and then turn this one white. And so now this is my dark value. But then what I'm also going to want to do is do a blur. And the reason being is because I want the edges to kind of be blurred. So then I'm going to connect this to this, and I'm going to bump that up. And then the levels here, what I would do is I would actually add in a join here. And what I would do is I would connect my first one to the top and the second one to the bottom. And so now I have this black W that's been like purposefully moved out. So this is not going to work. Well, it will work sort of. If I now plug this all in and add that to my mask, you'll notice that when I'm here, I get this slight edge here, but aside from that, it's like nothing has really changed. And the reason being is because it has to do with I blurred this image, which is just a mirror image of is like it's like it's not it's right on the edge, right? So this black here is is straight on the edge of the original W. So what I need to do is I actually need to shrink this threshold here that I've created. I need to shrink it in just a little bit. So what I could do to fix that, what I could do to make that happen is I could add in what's called a dilate. Dilate. And I want to add in find edges. Edges, EDGES. Edge detection. They call it edge detection in this program, I'm sorry. So in edge detection, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to plug that into here, and you'll notice it creates an edge detection from that mask. Actually, let's not use the mask. Let's use the threshold. And the reason why is because I don't want the inside of it. I just want the edge. Okay. And then I'm going to set the strength up just a little bit higher. I'm going to add in this value, the sample offset. I'm going to set to 2. So now it's getting there. It looks pretty good. It's got a fairly decent edge, but it's still kind of thin and small. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to connect it to my dilate, and that's going to make a thicker line. You'll notice that there's certain edges here that are not being reached. So what I could do is I could change the type of um, the type of um, edge detection that I'm using, and sometimes I'll get a better connection or a better, and then also changing the threshold value sometimes will help too. So now when I connect it, you'll notice that now it's a little bit thicker on the top, but it's still not quite okay. It's not quite perfect, but that's okay because what I'm going to do is what I could do is I could blur this and then create a threshold from that. So what I could do is connect my threshold again like this, and then connect the threshold to this. Sorry. Blur first, and then connect the blur, and then connect the blur to the threshold, and then bump the threshold up. And it's not going to do what I want it to do. So what I would need to do is I would need to preserve alpha. It's starting to work, but you'll notice that it's kind of still causing this hazing. So the reason for that is because I've created the auto mask first. I could take out the auto mask so I could go back to the original, connect the original to the edge detection. Then I could take out the blur. Let's just look at this. That's a little bit better. But It's connecting this middle area, which is what I don't want. Let me think. Could I just create a dilate from that? I could, but then so what I'm trying to do is I'm actually trying to isolate the edge and use the dilate to thicken that edge. So the reason for this is because when I thicken that edge, what will happen is I'll be able to subtract that from the top from the bottom, basically. So I'll be able to take this threshold and use the dilate to subtract from that. So if I go subtract and connect this to that, let's try that again. It should subtract those edges. So now we're closer to the we shrunk it down basically. And then what we could do is we could use that subtraction to blur the edges so that it's closer, and you'll notice that now we see more of that edge. This soft edge is what we've subtracted, so it's starting to look a little bit more like we're seeing, and this actually might be backwards because we're using white instead of black. Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to invert that. So we could do that by subtracting, changing this back. So this goes to white, this goes to black, but we're not getting anything here. Okay. So then let's go back a couple steps. This is white. So now I'm just going to basically take this and we're going to go like this. And then take this and turn this to black and white. So we're going to reverse the colors on this one. So now we're going to take this and subtract it from that. And now we have one that should be the opposite. And now the edges are a little bit more refined, or should be. That doesn't look right though. Maybe it's the opposite. Subtract one from the other. Yeah, that does it the opposite way around. Okay, so it's not that way, it's this way. Okay, so then we need to figure out, that does look, okay, so that it has shrunk it down. So you'll notice when you look at this threshold here, I'm gonna make this bigger so you can see it. This threshold is the original, and then when we used the threshold, the edge detection, and then dilated it, and then subtracted it from this one, we get this one. So you'll notice that this one is thicker here, this one's thinner. And then what I've done is I've added that to a blur to blur the edges, and then I've added that to this value, which is the original mask, right? And then here's what that looks like, and then added together. So now when I shrink this down, still not quite right. And I think it's because I have one of them backwards. But that is the premise behind this. So I think I need to think about how this is doing this. So I have this mask and I'm trying to create a join from this. So this is, let me think about this. Created this and it goes like that. And it's creating a mask like that. And then that's overlaying on top of this. But see, it's still cut out. So what I could do is take this part out all entirely. So now I just have that. And that's the blur. But I think I need to do the reverse of that. See, this is the reason why you think things out before you do a tutorial. So what you would do in this particular case is that my mask is the opposite because I want to cut out this area here. I don't want to cut out this area. So I would need to invert that, but let me think about that first. I'm here, but I want to join a solid color like that. Change this to black. Hang on. Actually, I probably want to invert that. Take that, plug that in, and then plug this in. Why is that? Oh, because we're backwards again. Because I'm trying to do a video mixer. Okay, so then we have this. Then we want to invert this. So invert RGB. And then we connect the invert RGB. And then we take that and plug this into the mask. Take this join out because we're no longer using that join. And so now we have that edge. And I could increase the dilation, but I'm still removing the opposite. I'm removing the wrong thing. Because what I wanted to do is I want to remove the curves from this in the middle sections. So I want that to be transparent. So that is correct. That's not from that, it's from this, right? So why am I getting nothing here? Because I want to offset that. Let me think. I want it to be this way. See, so the thing that I'm realizing here is that I actually want this middle section here to be straight, but for whatever reason, it's not straight. So I'm doing something incorrect here because I'm creating a mask and I'm actually creating that area should be it shouldn't be that way. So could it be alpha? No, it couldn't be alpha. It's the luminance. Okay. So how do you troubleshoot this? This is a perfectly good example as to why it's important to kind of think things through. The troubleshoot here would be, okay, well, there's something that's not quite jiving here because this is the black, this is the mask that's being created, and it's actually I don't need that anymore. So I'm creating this mask here, but it's not masking this effect here. If I make it transparent, or excuse me, invert the values from black to white and white to black, I didn't even need to make the inversion because it can do it within the mask node. I always forget that. Um, it's still not changing the values. So what I could do is I could add a colorize to see where I'm making my mistake. And the reason why is because I'm changing that entire color of that entire thing to a red so that I can see what's going on. Right at this moment, it's not showing anything, so that means there's something going on with my mask. My mask is not working. So I could do a solid color. I could do a join again and just see if it's because I'm not doing the because it has to be black and white is what I'm thinking. So I'm gonna join these two together. I have like we had just a second ago. I'm gonna plug that in, and you'll notice that nothing still has changed. So that means that something isn't right here. It could be a merge. That could be what's going on. Merge. It's not merging the two together, so I could add that together just to be on the safe side. I don't think that's aha. There we go. Okay. So what's basically happening is it needs the black and white in order to create the mask. So what I did was I created the mask, but then I joined them together. When you do a join, it just basically is two layers on top of each other. The two layers, even though you can see them as one, it doesn't keep them as one. So what I did was I took these two layers, joined them, but then I merged them together with the merge node, and then the mask is working. Now it's creating the kind of look that I want to create. So now I can remove my colorize, which will, when I delete that, it basically creates the node going to the mask. And then if I go to my node, now the inside, you'll notice that this line is straight, and then the rest of it has this curvy mirrored look, right? And what I could do is now that I have this all set up, I could set up a like a um, I can change this value. I could change this from rectangle to circle so that the values are thicker in those areas. I could make the threshold, I could increase the threshold, which is not going to do anything in this particular situation, but I can increase my size of my dilate. So dilate basically creates like lines based on a shape. And so the shape here is circle, which basically fills in the gaps in certain places. When I do like, for instance, rectangle, it's more angular square. It's very similar to like an outline for a vector shape. It's creating, these kind of harsh edges, except it's doing it like the size is the amount of like um, lines that it's using based on the shape. So if I do circle, you'll notice that these are all now rounded edges, right? But you'll notice that there's still this transparency here. Like this area in here is like empty, and the reason why is because the edge detection was empty in those particular places. So I need to figure out a way to increase the strength there so that it's thicker in the top. And I can do that by like increasing like this to like 4.3, 4.6. I could make these both 4, and that should be enough. And then now the dilate, you'll notice that the middle here is fully solid. So I'm going to continue down this path. So we've basically created a dilate. We've basically uh, created a solid edge. I've subtracted it. I've blurred it. We've made it into like a mask, and then I'm masking those edges, and then I'm combining it with the background, which is creating this look. One of the things that you'll notice is that everything is offset, and the reason being is because down here, over here in this offset creates that. So what we would do is we would basically put a transfer here, a transform, and in this transform, we would basically connect this to the color offset. And then I would just basically, you could use this to move the full thing. So now if I'm over here, I could move this. You'll notice that it moves the edges so that it's a little bit closer to where it needs to be. One of the other things you might notice is that this particular creation is larger than the original image. So if you go here, so basically what that means is you just want to make sure to add this option here because it's in this section here. We would need to do is add like an inlet here. So connect node, or not connect node, we'd need a float 2, and then we would need to connect the float 2 to the translation, and then expose as input, expose as input. And so now they have the option to move that the original so that it matches up with the edge of the other. So then what we could do is we could create a slide by basically going into the node, saying has min, has max. We need to set the max to 1. Actually, we need to set the min max to larger than 1 because we're saying, so like 2 to -2 of a minimum. And then the same thing on the Y. We're going to do has min, has max, -2, because we're talking about values from 0 in the middle and going left and right, right? So then we're going to do -2 and 2, and top to bottom, same kind of thing. So now when we move, it goes up and down, and then it'll also go left and right. But you'll notice that it's not quite moving enough, so we're going to have to increase that. So we'll change this to like 100, -100 and 100. And usually the reason why this happens is because we have two transforms, and it has to do with we've gone through a UV offset and so on and so forth. So we're just increasing the size. We're increasing this value. My node tree looks a little bit crazy, rushed, but that allows us to now kind of manage this value so that we get it where we need it to be. And so that was just a kind of a small like masking. I don't know if I would use that, like, moving because I want this area to be smooth in my personal opinion, but in some cases, some people may not want that. That's just like an additional kind of thing. It depends on the situation. But that's pretty much it for this tutorial. There's not really a crazy amount for this mask or this, excuse me, this mirrored effect. Um, it looks like this, and then we could throw in some other images to give as an example. So like I have like just some basic shapes, and then if I use the mirrored effect, it creates that kind of look. And what I would do is I would probably just remove the mask, but you get the idea. So that's basically what this does is it basically creates the mirrored effect over the top of the original image. And did it already create mirrored lean? And it creates this offset. So the reason why this one's acting kind of funny is because I need to do a auto mask for this one, or at least that's what I thought it was. Something else. Let me throw something in the background. That's weird. I've done something with my mask or with my mirrored effect. So let's delete all this then. Levels, merge, mask. Okay. So we don't need the mask. We could take the mask out. We could take that all out entirely. All of this. We don't need the levels anymore. So I could take that out. I could take out the transform because I don't need that and all of this because we just want to create a mirrored effect. So now the only thing is for whatever reason it's moved. Did I move? Okay, I don't need that anymore. I don't need that anymore. It's created that. There's my transform because this is moved. Okay, so then I could take this out and then I can move this to here. And then now I need to change my blur and then I need to move this. And then I need to save that. And now when I go back to there it goes. So it creates this kind of mirrored effect. And you'll also notice that this is kind of the first time that we've actually kind of talked about this, but when you save something in Wire, it almost is immediate as long as your patch is set to the proper category. So, like for instance, in this particular case, it's an effect. When you save it as an effect, it immediately makes the changes or saves the changes to that to that patch in Resolume Wire or excuse me, Arena or Avenue. And then you could increase the amount of edges, and you have the ability to kind of move those edges. And all I'm doing there is I'm just rotating the UV map to create that look. So that's pretty much it.